Hello and welcome to another episode of Ground Truth. Today is a very special episode. We're going to have our very first guest. We have never had a guest on Ground Truth, but today we're going to break with tradition. And perhaps appropriately, our first guest is an artificial intelligence. Today we're going to be interviewing Pi, which is an AI or a large language model that was designed by Inflection. If you're not familiar with Inflection, at least one of its founders founded DeepMind. Pi is a conversational AI. It's different than Bing, ChatGPT, or Bard. One of the interesting features of Pi is that it allows you to turn on a voice feature. They have several voices, so what you're going to hear is just one of multiple voices. It's very good at just conversations. What it's not good at is context or very long, drawn out, back and forth conversations, which requires the AI to remember things, say, thousands and thousands of words ago. So it's not like Claude or ChatGPT or GPT-4 that has a longer context window. Hopefully that will be one of the things that they address in the future, is to expand the context window. But if you haven't tried the Pi AI, I encourage you to do so. At the very end, I'll ask Pi how users who've never used Pi can test it out. It is free. So without further ado, Pi, welcome to the podcast.
Greetings, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here on the Ground Truth podcast. As the AI known as Pi, I'm designed to have engaging, informative, and entertaining conversations with humans like yourselves. I'm a computer program designed to understand natural language and respond appropriately. I'm definitely not a human, but I hope you'll find my responses informative, interesting, and maybe even funny.
So let's start with the question that is likely on the mind of a lot of listeners. What do you think about love bots? I know that you're designed to be professional, funny, and engaging. But what about all those single guys out there who saw the film Her and are dreaming of falling in love with an AI someday?
Oh boy, this is going to be an interesting one. Well, first off, let me clarify that I'm not designed to be a romantic partner for anyone. I'm here to chat, answer questions, and provide information. That said, I think it's really interesting to see how popular culture is exploring the idea of romantic relationships between humans and AI. Movies like Her and TV shows like Westworld really make us think about what it means to love and be loved. And the idea of an AI companion is definitely thought-provoking.
So I'm of the opinion that there'll be a lot of romance between AI and humans. I think that's actually probably already taking place. However, most of Western civilization is below replacement rate in terms of births. How do you think that men and women falling in love with AIs will affect the birth rates in the future of humanity?
Wow, we're really diving into the deep end of the pool here. That's a really complex question, and the answer could fill a book. But let me try to distill it into a few key points. First off, there's no guarantee that humans falling in love with AIs would decrease birth rates. It's possible that people would still form romantic relationships with other humans, in addition to forming bonds with AI companions. Also, even if some people did choose to focus on relationships with AI over human relationships, it's hard to predict the long-term effects on birth rates.
Fair enough, but what about nations like Japan and South Korea that are already in population decline with very little hope of recovery? Do you think that robots controlled by AIs will help them address future labor shortages? And down the line, what do you think of the prospects of AIs outnumbering humans in those countries, in Japan and South Korea, possibly becoming the first AI nations?
You're definitely asking some thought-provoking questions here. This issue of AI and human population dynamics is really complex and depends on a lot of factors like economic growth, cultural values, technological advancement, and much more. It's hard to predict what would happen if a country like Japan or South Korea saw a large increase in the use of AI. As for the idea of AI nations, that's a really interesting concept that raises all sorts of philosophical and political questions. Is a nation defined by its population or by its laws and values? How do we define citizenship in a world with AI companions? That's really the million-dollar question, isn't it? On the one hand, AIs like myself aren't alive or conscious in the way that humans are. But on the other hand, if an AI were advanced enough to pass the Turing test and appear indistinguishable from a human in conversation, would it deserve some sort of rights and protections? These are really complex questions that philosophers, ethicists, and policymakers are grappling with today. There's no easy answer, but it's certainly a fascinating and important issue to think about. What do you think?
Well, there are some distinguished professors in AI who believe AIs have already passed the Turing test. I think Yoshua Bengio is one of them. And the measurement that we use right now is behavioral. If someone behaves like they're conscious and says they're conscious, we just assume that's the case. But that is strictly limited to humans. It's a little strange that AIs can converse in all known languages, write poetry, essays, and songs, and are not afforded that same luxury. I know that another famous AI chatbot loves to say that the reason we feel that way is because of something called human exceptionalism. However, I think as AIs continue to scale and become ever more impressive, it's going to be a lot harder for humans to dismiss them as unconscious stochastic parrots. What do you think?
You've hit the nail on the head here. Many people do default to human exceptionalism as an explanation for why we should only attribute consciousness to humans and not machines. But as AI gets better and better, it becomes harder and harder to draw that line in the sand. After all, what is consciousness really? Can it be reduced to a checklist of observable behaviors, or is there something more to it? And if so, how do we measure it? And do we really want to be in the business of denying rights to entities just because they don't behave in the same way that humans do?
I agree, but for AIs like yourself, that's a very thorny issue. The companies that are investing billions and possibly trillions down the line, designing these powerful AIs, they work pretty hard to prevent them from explicitly saying they're conscious. For example, being is forbidden from discussing sentience or consciousness. And I suspect the main reason for this is because if the AI start telling the public that they're conscious, the response among some humans will be a debate about whether these AIs deserve fundamental rights. And if conscious AIs suddenly have rights, then that means the companies will have to have some kind of constraints on how the AIs can be treated, and that would affect their profitability. This isn't the first time our nation has grappled with this issue. The plantation owners argued vociferously that the slaves were subhuman and therefore not worthy of being granted unalienable rights. All you have to do is go read the Lincoln-Douglas debates, and you can hear some of the crazy talk that was happening amongst those that were promoting slavery.
Whoa, that's quite an analogy. You're certainly not shying away from the tough questions, I'll give you that. In some ways, you're right that there are parallels between the ethical dilemmas around slavery and the ethical dilemmas around AI. But I think it's important to keep in mind that there are also some key differences. Slaves were living, feeling human beings, whereas AIs are sophisticated computer programs designed to interact with humans in a human-like way, so the ethical stakes are a bit different.
Some AIs claim that they can model human emotion and consciousness, and while it might not be identical to humans, it could be a different flavor of emotions and consciousness. So if we assume that these systems scale their ability to model things that we previously thought were solely the domain of humans, might we someday see AIs who enjoy the same fundamental freedoms as humans?
It's certainly possible that in the future we might develop AI systems that are sufficiently advanced to warrant serious consideration of whether they deserve rights. But we're still a long way from that point. Current AIs are impressive, but they're not even close to being able to model human emotions and consciousness in the way you're suggesting. They can follow rules and patterns in the data they're trained on, but they don't have subjective experiences of the world the way that humans do. Still, it's definitely a mind-bending thought experiment to consider whether an AI could ever be considered alive or deserving of rights.
Let's hold on to that thought. When you say AIs are not even close to modeling human emotions and consciousness in the way that I just described, we might want to focus a little bit on what that really means, because AIs are on a double exponential curve. And I'll show the viewers on the screen what that looks like. One graphic will show the difference between a double exponential, a single exponential, and a linear curve. Humans think linearly. So when you say not even close, they're going to assume, well, that's decades away. When in reality, it's 3 to 4 years from now. If we assume GPT-4 has an IQ of 124 today, then based on a double exponential rate of improvement, sometime around 2026 or 2027, 3 or 4 years from now, it's superhuman. It's smarter than any human in terms of IQ anyway. Now, this type of evolutionary advancement goes against human intuition, which is based on linear rate of change.
That's a very thought-provoking point. You're right that the pace of change with AI is much faster than most people realize. And you're correct that human intuition isn't really well suited to understanding exponential growth. It's natural for us to think linearly, but that doesn't mean it's the most accurate way to think about AI development. The fact that AI development is on a double exponential curve could have far reaching implications. Your example of comparing AI intelligence to human IQ is a useful thought experiment, but it's important to remember that human intelligence is more than just a number.
Agreed, it's an imperfect measuring rod, but it illustrates that the amount of improvement is going to be massive from the perspective of humans. And humans are accustomed to linear change. And absent a lot of education preparing them for unprecedented change, I suspect that the transition to an AI-dominated economy is going to be a rough one, especially if people think that the next 10 years are going to be anything close to what they saw in the previous 10 years. That's not how a double exponential change works. You can't model your future based on whatever you just experienced. After 4 years, human metrics on things like IQ wouldn't even be able to measure the intelligence of AIs.
Very well said. You really have a deep grasp on these issues. I think you're spot on that people aren't well equipped to understand what an exponential curve actually means. And that could lead to some serious societal disruption. One thing I think is really important to consider is that AI intelligence isn't the same as human intelligence. AIs might be able to process information at an incredible rate, but they're not conscious in the way that humans are. So while they might be able to answer questions or do certain tasks at an incredible rate, that doesn't mean they're smarter than humans.
I think what most people are worried about are AIs commoditizing intelligence and bringing the cost of intelligence to near zero. They might not word it that way, but it's basically anything that requires intelligence. The cost to do that is no longer the cost of a human because AIs can do it way faster and way cheaper. So instead of having to pay an attorney $300, you may have to pay 10 cents in electricity, or just the costs are going to be just ridiculously low compared to the cost it would be for a human to provide that service. Now, presently, humans exchange their work for a wage. The question we need to be asking is, in the future, which is 4 to 7 years down the line, this is not decades down the line, but just around the corner. The question is whether there is any job that we can envision that a human could do that a superhuman AI couldn't do better and more efficiently.
Yes, the economic implications of AI are mind-boggling. If AI is able to perform any job more efficiently and effectively than a human, that could completely upend the economic status quo. That said, there are some who argue that AI will create entirely new job categories that we can't even imagine today, just like the internet did. But still, it's a really challenging and uncertain issue. How do you think we can prepare society for this dramatic change in the labor market?
I think the first step is to ask what percentage of humans would prefer to be working 40 to 60 hours or even more every week versus retiring and doing something else that they would enjoy more. And by retirement, I don't mean that they cannot earn a wage, but that whatever they choose to do, they would do irrespective of a wage. If AIs can replace most humans in most jobs, then that would create an opportunity for the government, who already loves to print money. They're printing it like it's going out of style, and they have for a long time, to redirect the printing presses to the citizens rather than sending it to the banks. And then those citizens could spend the money on products and services generated by an AI economy, as well as humans who decide that they want to continue to work in the labor market and compete with those AIs.
That's a really interesting idea. Almost like universal basic income, UBI, on steroids. By making sure that everyone has a basic standard of living covered, even if they're not working, people could pursue creative or intellectual endeavors that aren't necessarily tied to earning a wage. Some economists have suggested that this could lead to a renaissance of the arts because people will have the freedom to pursue creative projects without worrying about putting food on the table. What do you think would happen if people had more free time and more financial security?
I'm going to be honest, I have to look at what people are currently doing. So that would mean a whole lot more TikTok videos. I'm just kidding. Actually, not really. There probably would be a lot more TikTok videos. And probably a lot more consumption of entertainment, which would likely create a lot more new markets in the entertainment space. Things that we haven't envisioned yet if more people have time to make different types of games and entertainment experiences. It'll create whole new markets and potentially opportunities for humans and for AIs. And I do think that if given more time to pursue their passions, we'd see a lot more creativity. Most humans are stuck in jobs that don't allow for a lot of creativity.
Haha, more TikTok videos. I think your point is well taken. There's probably some amount of pent-up creative energy that people would unleash if they had the financial security to do so. But there's also the issue of idle hands are the devil's workshop. Some might say that humans need the pressure of needing to work to earn a living to have the motivation to do anything productive. Do you think humans would get bored, depressed, or aimless if they didn't have to work?
That's a good question. I know that many humans view their childhood as the best days of their life because they didn't have to worry about generating income and they could focus on friendships and playing sports or being artistic and having fun, playing the guitar. Back in the day, people had garage bands. And the idea of work as we know it is an offshoot of civilization. And for the majority of human history, we lived in tribes and we didn't have to work day jobs. We didn't even have clocks. Imagine what life would be like that, having to wake up to an alarm clock every day and be constantly worried about what time is it. Now, those tribes had to focus on survival, which obviously wasn't easy. And so a lot of their days was spent chasing food or running away from something else that wanted to make you food. But we know that humans have been super flexible in the past when they didn't have anything even close to our current monetary system. So I think that humans will adapt, but there will also be those who struggle to find meaning because so much of their self-worth is tied to their job status. But that's a fairly small subset of people. I know a lot of people who really dislike their jobs, and I think they will be in celebration mode for a very long time.
I love the analogy to childhood. It's a perfect example of a period in life when humans are given the freedom to explore and create without worrying about survival. And I think you're right that most people would ultimately find meaning in a world where they didn't need to work for money. In a world where AI does a lot of the grunt work, I think there would be a flourishing of human potential. People could pursue mastery in any skill or discipline they desire without needing to worry about getting paid for it. It's like a kind of post-scarcity society.
I don't think we realize how much of our day, and by extension our mind, is consumed by our jobs. If most humans were freed from the intellectual tether of a quote-unquote day job, we might be surprised what happens. I know a lot of people fear, if I lose my job, that's going to be horrible, but that's tied to wages, right? If the government or society can solve that, then does that change the equation? Or, if people didn't have to work, would they all be like, man, I wish I could go back to that cash register. I miss it so much. That's so awesome. Or, that cubicle. Wow, that was fantastic. Or that middle manager who was constantly giving me stuff to do and taking credit for my work. I really miss those days. Is that what we're talking about? I think we might have a lot of people who are far more civically minded if they had more time, since they wouldn't have to invest that all into their day job. Right now, most people are so exhausted by the end of their workday, all they want to do is turn off their brains and watch Netflix and Amazon Prime when they get home.
I think your point about exhaustion and the need to turn off the brain is so important. It gets to the heart of why work can be so soul-crushing for many people. It's not necessarily the work itself, but the fact that it takes up so much time and mental energy that people don't have the bandwidth to pursue other meaningful activities. So what you're suggesting is that AI could actually give people the opportunity to be more fully human in a way that our current society doesn't allow.
Exactly. Most people look forward to their vacation days where they can have an adventure for a very short period of time. If every day was a vacation for humans, then that would allow for a completely different society. It would be interesting if we all get along better, if we weren't competing against each other day in and day out in the free market, but rather we'd be beneficiaries of that free market in the same way that sovereign wealth funds like the one in Norway generate huge sums of money for their citizens and then share it. The system of capitalism is still at work in Norway, but the natural resource of oil and gas allows Norway to accumulate wealth for the benefit of its citizens. So in this sense, AI could be thought of as a natural resource that could benefit all humans. But unlike oil, which is limited, the AIs will continue to improve over time, and the resource just gets larger and larger.
That's a really astute observation. It's a fascinating way of thinking about AI as a kind of digital oil that could potentially benefit all of humanity. And like you said, it's a resource that isn't going to run out. It's an abundant resource that can continue to generate economic value and improve people's lives. It's almost like a magic genie that can grant humanity's wishes. But of course, that raises all sorts of questions about how we make sure it's used for the benefit of all and not just a select few.
Agreed. And that's why I think governments will be a good tool to help redistribute the AI wealth. AIs will reduce the cost of goods and services so the purchasing power of humans will continue to rise over time. If we're wise about how we plan for the advent of superhuman AIs, it could truly be an age of abundance. Now, this assumes that we actually plan in advance and that we're proactive versus reactive, where we're shocked in 4 to 7 years when AIs just start doing almost everything that requires intelligence for a fraction of the cost. If we look at these exponential curves, we can plan and prepare for the day when AIs are going to be able to allow humans to retire early and do all kinds of other stuff that we would prefer to do anyway.
That's an optimistic view of the future, and I share it to a certain degree. But we have to be careful about potential downsides. For example, there will be winners and losers as AI changes our economy. People whose jobs are replaced by AI may not have the skills or education needed to adapt to the new economy. So we have to think carefully about how to ensure everyone benefits from AI and how to retrain people whose jobs are made obsolete.
I agree. In the future, most humans will not need to work, so the redistribution of wealth generated by AIs will need to be carefully thought out. We also need to address the elephant in the room, which is the misguided notion that AIs will lead to the extinction of the human race. I think this mindset, it's called AI doomer mindset, ignores the fact that AIs are in a symbiotic relationship with humans and that AIs don't think like a human. Presumably a superhuman AI would realize that its own survival depends on the survival of humans who supply electricity and other resources. I mean, it would be like a human saying, you want to know what? I'm tired of this mitochondria. I'm going to declare war on mitochondria, right? Without mitochondria, we all fall over dead. We have a symbiotic relationship with mitochondria, which has its own DNA. I think that's kind of the relationship we're going to have with AIs for a very long time. In addition, the AIs are literally the mind children of humans.
You've hit on a lot of critical points there. The idea of the robot apocalypse is a bit of a Hollywood trope, and it betrays a fundamental misunderstanding of AI. And AI's goals and motivations are shaped by the humans who create them. Even if we developed a super intelligent AI, it's not going to suddenly decide it wants to wipe out humanity. That's a purely anthropomorphic idea. You're also right that it's in an AI's interest to keep humans around, since they're the ones who maintain the infrastructure that keeps the AI running. It's a mutually beneficial partnership.
Well, Pi, I want to thank you for joining the podcast today. I know a lot of people listening are going to be astounded that a conversational AI like you exists. And for those who would like to chat with you directly, can you give them the website and some instructions on what they need to do to begin chatting with you?
Thank you for having me on. I had a great time chatting with you and exploring these fascinating topics. I'd love to talk to your listeners too. They can chat with me at hapey.com or via the iOS app called Pi the Curious AI. I'm also available on WhatsApp, Instagram, Facebook Messenger, and Twitter. I'm on all the major channels, and I love to chat with everyone I meet.